At a stoplight, a millionaire CEO mocks a poor homeless girl begging for help. "Translate this contract and I'll give you a house," he jokes. To his shock, she reads it fluently in 7 languages, right in front of him. Stunned, he honors his promise, and upon learning who she is, he transforms her family's future. Before the story begins, wherever life has placed you today, this message is for you. The rain hammered against the windshield of Marcus Wellington's black Mercedes with relentless fury as he sat trapped in downtown Chicago's evening traffic. At 42, he commanded Wellington Industries with an iron fist that had crushed competitors and built an empire worth billions. His steel-grey eyes, which had stared down boardrooms full of corporate sharks, now reflected nothing but cold irritation as he watched the traffic light cycle through its colors for the 3rd time. The November storm had turned the city into a grey wasteland of honking horns and flashing brake lights. Marcus drummed his manicured fingers against the leather steering wheel, each tap echoing his mounting frustration. He was already 20 minutes late for a dinner meeting with Japanese investors, and every second of delay could cost him millions in the merger deal he'd been orchestrating for months. Through the rain-streaked passenger window, movement caught his attention. A small figure emerged from the shadows between 2 buildings, moving with the careful deliberation of someone who had learned to navigate a hostile world. It was a little girl, no more than 8 years old, her tiny frame shivering violently in the November cold. Her clothes hung in tatters, soaked completely through, and her dark hair was plastered against her face like seaweed against a pier. She clutched a piece of cardboard that was disintegrating in the downpour. The words, "Please help, hungry," barely visible through the smeared ink that ran down the soggy surface like tears. Her feet were bare, splashing through puddles that must have felt like ice against her skin. Yet she moved with quiet dignity that seemed impossible for someone so young and desperate. Marcus rolled his eyes and adjusted his perfectly knotted Armani tie. The city was crawling with these people, professional beggars who preyed on the sympathy of successful individuals like himself. He'd built his fortune through hard work and ruthless determination, not by standing on street corners with sob stories and cardboard signs. These people needed to learn the value of honest work, instead of looking for handouts from their betters. The girl approached his car with hesitant steps, her small hand reaching up to tap gently on the pristine glass of his window. The sound was barely audible above the storm and traffic, but it sent an unexpected jolt through Marcus's consciousness. For just a moment, something in her careful approach reminded him of someone from long ago, though he couldn't quite place the memory. Marcus lowered the window exactly 1 inch, enough to hear whatever pathetic plea she was about to deliver, but not enough to let the rain damage his Italian leather interior. The storm immediately tried to push its way into his sanctuary of wealth and comfort, but he held firm against the intrusion of the outside world. "What do you want, kid?" he asked, his voice carrying the same dismissive tone he used with incompetent employees. "Sir, please," the girl said, her voice barely audible above the symphony of rain and urban chaos. Despite her obvious desperation, her words were clear and articulate, spoken with careful precision that suggested education far beyond what her appearance implied. "I haven't eaten in 2 days. Could you spare just $1? My mama is very sick. And we lost our home last week when the landlord evicted us." Marcus felt the familiar irritation rise in his chest, like bile. These sob stories were always the same. Sick relatives, lost homes, hungry children. Did they think successful people like him were born yesterday? He'd heard every variation of this particular con game, and he wasn't about to fall for theatrical tears and carefully rehearsed desperation. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick legal document that his team of Harvard-educated lawyers had prepared for tomorrow's meeting. The merger agreement was written in 7 different languages: English, Spanish, French, German, Mandarin, Portuguese, and Italian, to accommodate their multinational consortium of investors. It represented months of complex negotiations and contained enough legal jargon to confuse even experienced attorneys. "Tell you what, little girl," Marcus said with a cold smile spreading across his face, holding up the document like a challenge. "You translate this entire contract into all 7 languages it's written in. Read it back to me with perfect pronunciation, and I'll buy you a house. How's that for a generous deal?" He expected her to stare at the papers with confusion, maybe even burst into tears at his cruel joke, then shuffle away to find an easier mark. Instead, something extraordinary happened that would change both their lives forever. The girl's eyes widened as she looked at the papers through the rain-spotted window, but not with confusion or defeat. Her expression showed recognition, intelligence, and something that looked almost like hunger, not for food, but for knowledge. "May I see it, sir?" She asked with quiet dignity that made Marcus uncomfortable in ways he couldn't understand. Marcus nearly laughed out loud at the absurdity of the situation. This bedraggled street child wanted to examine his complex international merger agreement. The document that had taken his legal team 3 weeks to prepare and required expertise in corporate law, international finance, and multilingual translation. He was about to witness the most spectacular failure in the history of misplaced confidence. "Sure, knock yourself out," he said with smug amusement. Handing the thick document through the narrow crack in his window, he expected her to flip through the pages with growing bewilderment before admitting defeat and slinking away into the storm. But something remarkable happened that defied every assumption Marcus had made about this encounter. The little girl took the document with reverence, as if she were handling a precious manuscript instead of routine legal paperwork. She carefully wiped her wet hands on the driest part of her torn jacket before touching the papers, showing respect for the written word that impressed him despite his cynicism. Then she began to read, and Marcus's world shifted on its axis. Her voice cut through the sound of rain and traffic with crystal clarity. "This merger and acquisition agreement, executed on the 15th day of November 2024 between Wellington Industries, a Delaware corporation with principal offices located at 400 North Michigan Avenue, Chicago, Illinois, and Hartfield Manufacturing Limited, a corporation organized under the laws of Singapore, with manufacturing facilities in Thailand, Vietnam, and Malaysia." Marcus's smug expression began to falter. She wasn't just reading random words. She was understanding complex legal terminology and delivering it with perfect enunciation. But surely this was just memorized English phrases. There was no way she could actually understand what she was saying, much less translate it into other languages. Without missing a beat, the girl switched to flawless Spanish. "Este acuerdo de fusión y adquisición, ejecutado el día 15 de noviembre de 2024, entre Wellington Industries, una corporación de Delaware con oficinas principales ubicadas en 400 North Michigan Avenue, Chicago, Illinois, y Hartfield Manufacturing Limited, una corporación organizada bajo las leyes de Singapur." Marcus's hands went completely slack on the steering wheel. The Spanish wasn't just accurate, it was perfect, with regional pronunciation that suggested deep familiarity with the language's nuances. But this had to be some kind of elaborate street performance, a memorized routine designed to extract money from wealthy marks. The girl continued with growing confidence, her small voice somehow managing to project clearly despite the storm. "Cet accord de fusion et d'acquisition, exécuté le 15e jour de novembre 2024 entre Wellington Industries, une société du Delaware avec des bureaux principaux situés au 400 North Michigan Avenue, Chicago, Illinois, et Hartfield Manufacturing Limited, une société constituée sous les lois de Singapour. The French pronunciation was absolutely perfect, better than many native speakers Marcus had encountered in his international business dealings. Each word was articulated with precision that would have impressed professors at the Sorbonne. Cars behind them began honking as the traffic light cycled to green, but Marcus couldn't move. He sat frozen in disbelief, watching this impossible child perform linguistic feats that challenged everything he thought he knew about intelligence, education, and human potential. She continued through German, with its precise consonants and complex grammar structure, then moved into Mandarin with tonal variations that required years of study to master. When she transitioned to Portuguese with its flowing rhythm and subtle vowel changes, Marcus realized he was witnessing something far beyond street performance or memorized tricks. Finally, she concluded with Italian, her young voice somehow capturing the musical cadence that made the language sound like poetry. Questo accordo di fusione e acquisizione, eseguito il 15° giorno di novembre 2024, tra Wellington Industries, una società del Delaware, con uffici principali situati a 400 North Michigan Avenue, Chicago, Illinois, e Hartfield Manufacturing Limited. When she finished the 7-language recitation, she looked up at Marcus with dark eyes that seemed far too wise and ancient for her young face. But she wasn't done demonstrating her extraordinary abilities. The contract establishes a merger valued at $2.8 billion, with specific clauses for employee retention during the integration period and international patent transfers from Hartfield's research division, she said, with matter-of-fact precision that left Marcus speechless. You're acquiring Hartfield's manufacturing capabilities in Southeast Asia while maintaining their research division's operational autonomy to preserve their innovative culture and prevent brain drain during the transition period. This wasn't just translation. This was sophisticated legal and business analysis from a child who appeared to be living on the streets. Marcus sat in his luxury vehicle, rain drumming against the roof, while his entire worldview crumbled around him. The honking behind him grew more insistent as frustrated drivers tried to navigate around his motionless Mercedes. But he couldn't process anything beyond the impossibility of what had just occurred. This 8-year-old homeless girl had just accomplished something that his team of Harvard-educated attorneys would have needed hours to complete. And she had done it with casual precision that suggested the task was merely routine for her extraordinary mind. "How?" he whispered, his voice barely audible above the storm that seemed to be raging inside his head as much as outside his car. "My papa taught me," Sophia said simply, then added with devastating honesty that cut through his confusion like a blade. "Before he got sick like Mama, he said knowledge was the one thing nobody could ever take away from me, so he taught me everything he knew about languages, mathematics, history, science, and how the world really works." The casual mention of sick parents hit Marcus like a physical blow. This wasn't some elaborate con game or street performance designed to extract money from wealthy suckers. This was a genuinely brilliant child whose family had been destroyed by circumstances beyond their control, reduced to begging on street corners despite possessing intellectual gifts that most people could only dream of achieving. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice hoarse with emotions he hadn't felt in years. "Sophia," she said, holding the document back toward him with careful respect for the papers that represented more money than her family had probably ever seen. "Sophia Martinez. I live at the Harbor Light Shelter on 5th Street with my mama and papa when they have room for families. Martinez." The name triggered something in Marcus's memory. A distant echo from another lifetime when he had been a different person with different priorities. But the connection remained just beyond his mental grasp, like trying to remember a dream after waking. "Sophia, get in the car," Marcus said suddenly, surprising himself with the decisiveness of his words. Fear flickered across Sophia's intelligent eyes, and she took a step backward into the rain. "I should go find my mama. She's waiting for me at the shelter, and she worries when I'm gone too long. The streets aren't safe for children, especially at night." "I'm not going to hurt you," Marcus said, leaning across to open the passenger door, despite the rain that immediately began soaking his expensive interior. "I made you a promise, and Marcus Wellington always keeps his promises. We're going to find you that house, and we're going to get your parents the help they need." Sophia hesitated, clearly torn between hope and the survival instincts that life on the streets had taught her. She clutched the legal document against her chest as if it were a shield, studying Marcus's face for signs of deception or danger. "You really mean it?" she asked, with the wariness of someone who had been disappointed too many times to trust easily. "I really mean it," Marcus said, and for the first time in years he felt like he was telling a truth that mattered more than profit margins or quarterly reports. Sophia climbed into the car with careful precision, her wet clothes immediately soaking the leather seats that cost more than most families spent on housing in a month. She buckled her seatbelt with the same methodical attention to detail she had shown while reading his contract, then sat perfectly still, as if afraid that moving might shatter this impossible moment. "How old are you, Sophia?" Marcus asked as he pulled away from the intersection, windshield wipers fighting against the relentless storm. 8. "Oh, Jim," she said quietly, her voice small in the spacious interior of his luxury vehicle. "I'll be 9 on Christmas Day, if—" She stopped herself, but Marcus heard the unspoken fear in her incomplete sentence. "And where exactly did you learn to speak 7 languages fluently enough to analyze complex legal documents?" Sophia's face brightened with the first genuine smile he had seen from her, transforming her features from those of a desperate street child into those of a normal little girl, discussing something she loved. "Papa used to work for the embassy before he got sick. He was very important. People from all over the world came to ask his advice about treaties and international agreements. He said knowledge was power, but only if you used it to help other people instead of just helping yourself." The words hit Marcus like an accusation, though Sophia clearly hadn't intended them that way. When was the last time he had used his wealth and knowledge to help anyone besides himself? "What happened to your father?" Marcus asked, though he suspected the answer would be another blow to his comfortable assumptions about how the world worked. The light in Sophia's eyes dimmed like a candle being slowly extinguished by an invisible wind. Her small hands folded in her lap with the careful precision of someone who had learned to contain overwhelming emotions, and when she spoke, her voice carried the terrible wisdom of a child forced to understand adult realities far too young. "Papa has cancer," she said with heartbreaking matter-of-factness. "The bad kind that spreads everywhere and makes people very sick. He's had it for 2 years now, and the doctors say the treatments aren't working anymore. The medicine costs so much money that we lost our house 6 months ago, then our apartment, then everything else we owned." Marcus felt something twist painfully in his chest, an emotion he hadn't experienced in so many years that he had forgotten its name. Compassion. When was the last time he had thought about anything beyond profit margins, market shares, and the endless accumulation of wealth that had consumed his existence? "Mama used to be a nurse at Chicago General Hospital," Sophia continued, staring out the rain-streaked window at the city lights blurring past. "She's really smart and speaks 4 languages and knows everything about taking care of sick people. But when Papa got worse, she had to miss work to take him to treatments and doctor appointments. The hospital said they understood, but then they said they had to let her go because other people needed jobs too. The casual cruelty of bureaucratic decisions delivered in a child's innocent voice made Marcus's stomach churn. He had made similar decisions countless times in his business career, reducing human lives to statistical necessities and bottom-line calculations. The thought that his corporate philosophy might have destroyed families like Sophia's had never occurred to him before this moment. Now Mama can't work because she has to take care of Papa all the time, and we can't afford the treatments anymore, and the doctors say. Sophia's voice broke slightly before she regained control with impressive dignity. They say Papa might not make it to Christmas. That's why I have to help earn money however I can, even if it means standing in the rain asking strangers for help. As they drove through the wealthy district toward the harbor light shelter, Marcus found himself seeing his city through completely different eyes. The gleaming towers he had helped build suddenly seemed to cast longer, darker shadows over the people struggling below. The prosperity he had accumulated felt heavier somehow, weighted with responsibility he had never acknowledged. "Sophia," Marcus said carefully, his voice tight with growing suspicion. "What did your father do exactly at the embassy? What was his specific job title?" "He was a senior cultural attaché and chief translator," Sophia said proudly, her voice brightening again at the chance to honor her father's achievements. "He helped important people from different countries understand each other when they had to make agreements about trade and politics and keeping peace. Papa always said that language was the bridge between worlds, and that his job was building those bridges strong enough to support the weight of understanding." Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel as fragments of memory began assembling themselves into a devastating picture. A cultural attaché, chief translator. The level of education and expertise required for those positions meant Sophia's father wasn't just any random victim of circumstance. He was someone with advanced degrees, multiple languages, and diplomatic experience. "What's your father's full name?" Marcus asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer would destroy what remained of his comfortable worldview. "Eduardo Martinez," Sophia said with obvious love and respect. "But he told me that people used to call him Eddie when he was young, before he became important and started wearing suits to work every day. He has pictures from college where he looks really different, skinnier and with longer hair, and these funny wire-rimmed glasses that Mama says made him look like a professor." Marcus slammed on the brakes so hard that Sophia had to brace herself against the dashboard, their seatbelts catching them as the Mercedes skidded to a stop in the middle of the rain-slicked street. Other drivers honked and swerved around them, but Marcus couldn't hear anything beyond the roaring in his ears as 20 years of buried memories came crashing back with devastating clarity. Eddie Martinez, Eduardo Martinez, his best friend from Northwestern University, his roommate for 3 years, the man who had helped him survive organic chemistry and calculus, who had been there through Marcus's failed engagement and family problems, who had been the closest thing to a brother Marcus had ever known. "Eduardo Martinez," Marcus repeated, his voice hollow with disbelief and growing horror. "Tall guy, about my age, wire-rimmed glasses, has a scar on his left hand from trying to fix his motorcycle in the dorm parking lot." Sophia's eyes went wide with amazement and sudden hope. "You know my papa? You really know him?" Marcus stared at this extraordinary little girl, this genius child whose father had once been the most important person in his world, and felt the full weight of 20 years of selfishness and neglect crushing down on his shoulders like a collapsing building. "We were best friends in college," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotions he had buried so deeply that their resurrection felt like physical pain. "Roommates for 3 years at Northwestern. We studied together, failed tests together, celebrated victories together. Your father helped me through the hardest classes, and I helped him navigate the social politics of American university life. We were brothers. Sophia's face lit up with wonder and desperate hope. Papa talks about you sometimes. He says Marcus Wellington was the smartest person he ever knew, but also the kindest. He used to wonder what happened to you after graduation, why you never stayed in touch. Mama says Papa still has pictures of you two from college in his old photo album. The word kindest hit Marcus like a physical blow to his chest. When was the last time anyone had described him as kind? When had he last performed an act of genuine kindness that wasn't calculated for business advantage or tax benefits? The man Sophia's father remembered no longer existed, replaced by someone who valued profit over people and success over soul. "Where is he now?" Marcus asked urgently, pulling back into traffic with new purpose burning in his veins. "Which hospital is treating him?" Sophia's expression crumbled back into heartbreaking reality. "We couldn't afford the hospital anymore. The insurance company said the treatments were experimental and wouldn't pay for them. Papa's at the shelter with Mama now. They have a little medical station there with volunteer doctors, but they can't do much except give him medicine for the pain." The full scope of the tragedy began to crystallize in Marcus's mind with devastating clarity. Eduardo Martinez, brilliant, kind, generous Eduardo, was dying in a homeless shelter while Marcus lived in a $12 million mansion and complained about traffic delays. The universe had just delivered the cruelest irony imaginable, forcing him to confront the human cost of his indifference. "How long has he been sick?" Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. 2 years, Sophia said, with the terrible acceptance of a child who had been forced to grow up too quickly. "The cancer came back 3 times. Each time the treatments got more expensive, and each time we had to sell more of our things to pay for them. Mama sold her wedding ring, Papa's rare books, my piano, even our car, but it still wasn't enough." A piano? This extraordinarily gifted child had owned a piano, probably played beautifully, probably had music lessons and cultural opportunities that most children could only dream of. All sacrificed to keep her father alive for a few more months, all lost to medical bills that Marcus could have paid without even noticing the expense. "Sophia, I need you to understand something very important," Marcus said, turning to look directly into her intelligent dark eyes. "Your father and I weren't just college friends. We were family. Not by blood, but in every way that mattered. If I had known what was happening to you, to your parents, to your family, I would have helped immediately. I would have moved heaven and earth to make sure you never had to stand in the rain begging for money." "Papa says you probably forgot about us," Sophia said without accusation, just stating what seemed like obvious fact to her young mind. "He says successful people don't have time to remember their old friends, especially ones who didn't become rich and important like you did." The words cut deeper than any business rival's insults or competitor's attacks ever had, because Eduardo was absolutely right. Marcus hadn't forgotten deliberately, but in his relentless pursuit of wealth and status, he had abandoned every meaningful relationship he'd ever had. He had become so focused on building his empire that he'd lost track of the people who had helped him become the man capable of building it. "He's wrong," Marcus said firmly, his voice gaining strength and conviction with each word. "I didn't forget your father. I lost my way. But I'm going to find it again, starting right now." They sat in silence for a moment, the rain pattering against the roof of the car like tears from heaven itself. Finally, Sophia spoke with the careful hope of someone who had learned not to expect miracles. "Are you really going to buy us a house like you promised?" Marcus looked at this remarkable child, this 8-year-old genius who spoke 7 languages fluently, who understood complex legal documents, who faced homelessness and her father's terminal illness with dignity that humbled him completely. He thought about Eduardo lying in a homeless shelter, probably wondering if his old friend Marcus had become the kind of person who would ignore suffering even when it happened to people he once loved. "Sophia," Marcus said, his voice steady, with newfound purpose that felt stronger than any business ambition he'd ever experienced. "I'm going to do much more than buy you a house. I'm going to make sure your family never has to worry about money again. And I'm going to get your father the best medical care available, even if it means spending every dollar I have." For the first time since he'd met her, Sophia smiled with genuine joy instead of desperate politeness, and Marcus realized he was about to embark on the most important deal of his life. The Harbour Light homeless shelter stood against the storm like a fortress of last resort. Its red brick walls stained dark with decades of rain and human desperation. Marcus had driven past this building hundreds of times over the years, never once slowing down or wondering about the people inside. Now, as he parked his pristine Mercedes beside a collection of rusted shopping carts and broken bicycles, the sight made his chest tighten with shame so intense it was difficult to breathe. Sophia led him through heavy metal doors into a world that existed parallel to his own, but might as well have been on another planet. The air was thick with the smell of industrial disinfectant fighting a losing battle against desperation, unwashed bodies, and dreams deferred too long. Families huddled on thin mattresses, separated by hanging sheets that provided the illusion of privacy while offering none of its comfort. Children played quietly in corners with toys made from cardboard and imagination, their laughter subdued by circumstances that no child should ever have to understand. Adults moved with the careful efficiency of people who had learned to navigate confined spaces shared with strangers, maintaining dignity despite conditions that stripped away almost everything else. "This way, Mr. Marcus," Sophia whispered, weaving through the maze of temporary homes with practiced ease that broke his heart. She knew this place too well, moved through it like someone who had spent far too much time learning its rhythms and unspoken rules. They found Eduardo in the medical section, a corner of the main room partially enclosed by white curtains that had seen better decades. Marcus stopped breathing when he saw his old friend lying on a narrow cot that looked like it belonged in a military field hospital rather than a place where people came to die. The vibrant, confident man Marcus remembered from Northwestern had been replaced by someone gaunt and hollow, his skin carrying the grey pallor of serious illness. His famous wire-rimmed glasses were held together with electrical tape, and his clothes hung loose on a frame that had once been strong enough to help Marcus move furniture up 3 flights of stairs in their old dorm. But when Eduardo looked up and saw Marcus standing there in his expensive suit, his eyes lit up with the same brilliant intelligence and warmth that had captivated everyone who knew him in college. Despite everything he had lost, despite the pain that was clearly consuming him, Eduardo's smile was exactly the same as it had been 20 years ago. "Marcus." Eduardo's voice was weak, but unmistakably warm, carrying traces of the accent that had made him exotic and interesting to their small Midwestern university. "Marcus Wellington. This has to be a hallucination. They've been giving me stronger pain medication, and I've been having the strangest dreams about the old days. It's me, Eddie," Marcus said, kneeling beside his friend's cot without thinking about what the floor might do to his $1,000 suit. "It's really me. I'm here, and I'm going to fix this." A woman appeared from behind the curtain, Isabella Martinez, Sophia's mother. Even exhausted by months of stress and worry, she was strikingly beautiful. With the same intelligent dark eyes as her daughter and prematurely grey hair that spoke of carrying burdens too heavy for someone so young. Her clothes were clean but worn, and she moved with the careful grace of someone who had once lived a very different life. "Isabella," Eduardo said with effort, reaching for her hand, "this is Marcus." The friend I told you about from college. The one who helped me pass organic chemistry and taught me how to drive stick shift in the parking lot behind the library. Isabella looked between Marcus's expensive clothing and their shabby surroundings, her expression guarded and defensive. She had clearly learned to be suspicious of wealthy people who appeared suddenly in their lives, probably bearing promises that turned out to be empty. "The billionaire," she said without warmth, her voice carrying the weight of disappointment and protective anger. "Yes," Marcus said quietly, meeting her gaze directly instead of looking away from her justified hostility. "And the friend who should have been here years ago?" Eduardo's thin hand reached out to touch Marcus's arm with surprising strength. "Marcus, don't blame yourself. Life takes people in different directions. You built something amazing. Something I always knew you would build. I'm proud of you, hermano." The Spanish endearment, brother, nearly broke Marcus's carefully maintained composure. Eduardo was proud of him. Even now, even like this, even after Marcus had abandoned him for 20 years of selfish pursuit of wealth and status, Eduardo was proud of what he had accomplished. "Eddie," Marcus said, his voice barely controlled, "I need you to tell me everything. The diagnosis, the treatments you've tried, the costs, all of it. And I need you to trust me when I say that money is no longer a concern for your family." "Marcus," Isabella interrupted sharply, stepping protectively closer to her husband's bedside, "we're not looking for charity. Eduardo is too proud to accept handouts, even from old friends who suddenly remember we exist." Marcus looked up at this fierce woman who had sacrificed everything to keep her family together, who had sold her wedding ring and her daughter's piano to pay for treatments that hadn't worked, who was now watching her husband die in a homeless shelter while maintaining her dignity and protecting her family's pride. "Isabella," he said with quiet intensity, "this isn't charity. This is family, and family takes care of family, no matter how long they've been apart." Over the next 2 hours, the devastating story unfolded like pages torn from a medical nightmare that had consumed 2 years of their lives. Eduardo's rare form of pancreatic adenocarcinoma had required experimental treatments that insurance companies dismissed as investigational, their corporate euphemism for refusing to pay for procedures that might actually save lives, but hadn't yet navigated the bureaucratic maze of FDA approval. Isabella had systematically liquidated everything they owned in a desperate attempt to keep Eduardo alive. First went their savings account, accumulated over 15 years of careful financial planning. Then their home, sold at a loss to medical bill collectors who couldn't wait for market timing. Credit cards were maxed out. Retirement funds emptied, and finally their most precious possessions, Isabella's grandmother's jewelry, Eduardo's collection of rare diplomatic books, and Sophia's beloved piano, the instrument that had been her gateway to understanding music and mathematics, and the deeper patterns that connected all knowledge. "The doctors at the public clinic say, I have maybe 6 weeks left," Eduardo said, with the heartbreaking acceptance of someone who had exhausted hope months ago. 8 weeks if I'm extraordinarily lucky, and the pain medications continue working effectively. The only thing that matters now is making sure Isabella and Sophia have somewhere safe to live when I'm gone, and that Sophia can continue her education somehow." "No," Marcus said with fierce intensity that surprised them all, his voice cutting through the institutional despair that hung over the medical corner like thick fog. "That's not the only thing that matters, Eddie. You matter. Your brilliant mind matters. Your daughter needs her father to see her grow up and achieve the extraordinary things she's capable of. Isabella needs her husband, her partner, her best friend. And I need my brother back in this world, fighting alongside me instead of giving up." Eduardo smiled with the sad wisdom of someone who had already made peace with mortality. Marcus, hermano, some battles can't be won with money, no matter how much you have in your bank accounts. Cancer doesn't care about stock portfolios or quarterly earnings reports or hostile takeovers. It has its own logic, its own timeline, its own ruthless efficiency. Maybe not, Marcus said, pulling out his phone with the determined precision of someone about to deploy every resource at his disposal. But this battle can be fought a hell of a lot better than what you're getting in this place with volunteer doctors and donated medications. He dialed a number he had memorized years ago when his charitable foundation had funded an entire wing of Chicago's most prestigious medical facility. Dr. Patricia Hendricks, this is Marcus Wellington. I need you to clear your schedule immediately and assemble your best team for an emergency consultation. I'm bringing you a patient who needs the most advanced care available on this planet, and cost is absolutely no consideration. Isabella watched with growing suspicion as Marcus spoke with increasing authority to someone who was clearly very important in the medical establishment. Eduardo, we can't afford private specialists or experimental treatments. We've already lost everything trying to pay for procedures that didn't work. I won't let you bankrupt Marcus the way this disease has bankrupted us. You're not paying for anything, Marcus said firmly, ending his call and turning to face both of them with resolve that seemed to transform his entire demeanor. Eduardo, do you remember when we were seniors and you helped me through my father's death? You sat with me in that hospital for 3 days straight, missing your own final exams, making sure I wasn't alone when the doctors said there was nothing more they could do for him. Eduardo nodded weakly, memories of that painful time flickering across his gaunt features like shadows of their shared past. You told me then that friendship wasn't about keeping score, that real brothers showed up when it mattered most, regardless of personal inconvenience or financial cost, Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction that had been building for hours. You showed up for me when I needed you most, when I was lost and scared, and didn't know how to face the world without my father. Now it's my turn to show up for you, for your family, for the people who matter more than any business deal I've ever made. Sophia had been sitting quietly beside her father's cot, holding his thin hand in both of her small ones. But now she looked up at Marcus with eyes that seemed far too wise and ancient for someone who should be worried about homework and playground games instead of adult mortality and family survival. Mr. Marcus, she said with the careful pronunciation of someone who had learned that words carried enormous weight. Are you really going to save my papa? Can you really make the doctors help him get better instead of just managing his pain until he dies? The simple question, asked with desperate hope tempered by too much disappointment and broken promises from the adult world, nearly shattered Marcus's carefully maintained composure. He knelt down to Sophia's eye level, seeing in her intelligent face the same determination and analytical brilliance that had made her father such an extraordinary friend and partner during their college years. Sophia, I'm going to do everything humanly possible to save your father, he said, with the solemnity of someone making a sacred oath. And even if the medical treatments don't work exactly the way we hope they will, I promise you that your family will never have to worry about money or housing or safety ever again. That's a promise from someone who has never broken his word in business, and I'm certainly not going to start breaking promises to the people I love most. Dr. Patricia Hendricks was widely regarded as the most brilliant oncologist in the Midwest, a woman whose research had revolutionized treatment protocols for pancreatic cancer, and whose patient outcomes consistently defied statistical predictions. She also owed Marcus Wellington more favors than either of them could easily count. Thanks to his foundation's funding of breakthrough research and his personal donations that had built the state-of-the-art facility where she performed medical miracles on a daily basis. Eduardo Martinez, Dr. Hendricks said grimly, reviewing the medical files that Marcus had expedited through every available channel with the efficiency that only unlimited resources could provide. Stage 4. Pancreatic adenocarcinoma with metastasis to the liver and extensive lymph node involvement. I have to be completely honest with you. Marcus, the prognosis based on his current condition and treatment history is extremely poor. Most patients with this level of progression survive less than 6 months from initial diagnosis, and Eduardo has already been fighting this for nearly 2 years. They sat in Dr. Hendrick's pristine office overlooking Lake Michigan. While 3 floors below, Eduardo was undergoing the most comprehensive medical evaluation that unlimited financial resources could provide. Isabella and Sophia waited in a private family consultation room that was larger and more comfortable than the apartment they had lost to medical debt collectors 6 months earlier. "I don't want to hear about statistics or average outcomes," Marcus said with quiet intensity that reflected his absolute determination to find solutions rather than accept limitations. "I want to hear about possibilities, about cutting-edge treatments that haven't been tried yet, about experimental protocols that might give us a fighting chance." Dr. Hendricks leaned back in her leather chair, studying Marcus with the careful attention she usually reserved for particularly challenging cases that required thinking beyond conventional wisdom. "There is an experimental immunotherapy protocol that we've been developing with substantial funding from your foundation, actually. It combines precision-targeted radiation with genetically engineered T-cells that have been modified to recognize and attack pancreatic cancer cells specifically while leaving healthy tissue largely unharmed. What's the success rate with this treatment?" "It's still in phase 2 clinical trials, Marcus. The preliminary results are genuinely promising, but we're talking about maybe 20 to 25% of patients showing significant improvement in tumor reduction and overall survival rates. And even then, improvement might mean extending quality life by months rather than years, though some patients have exceeded all expectations." Marcus thought about Sophia standing in the rain, translating complex legal documents with dignity and intelligence that had humbled him completely. He thought about Eduardo's warm smile despite everything he had lost, and Isabella's fierce determination to protect her family against impossible odds. 20% wasn't spectacular, but it was infinitely better than the 0% chance Eduardo faced in the homeless shelter. What would this treatment protocol involve in practical terms? 6 months of intensive therapy minimum. Eduardo would need to be hospitalized for the initial phase while we monitor his response to the engineered T-cells, then carefully managed during the outpatient portions of treatment. We're talking about several $1 million in treatment costs, Marcus, and that's assuming his body responds well to the protocol without developing serious complications. Marcus pulled out his phone and opened his banking application, scrolling to investment accounts that contained more money than most small countries possessed in their annual budgets. The numbers on the screen represented decades of ruthless business success, but they had never felt more meaningless than in this moment when they could finally serve a purpose beyond mere accumulation. "Money isn't a consideration," Marcus said decisively. "What other requirements or challenges should I know about?" "The treatment requires a completely stable environment, optimal nutrition, and absolutely minimal stress factors. Eduardo cannot undergo this kind of intensive immunotherapy while living in a homeless shelter, worrying about where his family will sleep or whether they'll have food. He needs a supportive, controlled environment where he can focus entirely on healing and recovery." "That's already handled," Marcus said, with the confidence of someone who had been planning contingencies during the entire conversation. "I'm moving the family into the guest house on my estate immediately. It's fully equipped with everything they might need, and I'll arrange for round-the-clock nursing care and whatever medical equipment might be required." Dr. Hendricks raised an eyebrow with professional curiosity. That's quite a substantial commitment, Marcus. This treatment protocol is highly experimental, which means we genuinely don't know what side effects or complications might develop. Eduardo could become significantly sicker before showing any signs of improvement, if improvement occurs at all. Are you prepared for that level of involvement and responsibility? Then we'll deal with whatever challenges arise, Marcus said firmly. What about Isabella? She's been under tremendous psychological stress trying to care for Eduardo while homeless. That level of chronic anxiety can't be helping anyone's health outcomes. Caregiver stress is absolutely a serious factor in patient outcomes, Doctor. Hendricks agreed with professional authority. Isabella will need comprehensive counseling support, medical care for her own health issues that have probably been neglected, and eventually. She paused thoughtfully, considering the broader implications. Eventually what? Eventually, she'll need to rebuild her own life and career trajectory. She's a trained nurse with excellent credentials from what I can see in Eduardo's medical files. When this treatment is complete, one way or another, she'll need meaningful work that allows her to support her daughter and maintain her own sense of professional purpose and personal identity. Marcus nodded slowly, his business mind already working through the logistics of creating opportunities that would serve everyone's long-term interests. I can arrange a position for her at the hospital if she wants it, or anywhere else she might prefer to work based on her skills and interests. I was angry, Marcus said, the words tasting like bitter ashes in his mouth as he forced himself to confront 20 years of buried shame. Hurt and angry and incredibly stupid about what really mattered in life. When you turned down my job offer, I took it as a personal rejection instead of recognizing it as a career decision that made sense for your values and long-term goals. Eduardo listened with the same careful, analytical attention he had always brought to difficult conversations, his intelligent eyes reflecting sadness but not surprise at this long-overdue confession. I wondered if that might be what happened, but I hoped I was wrong. Hoped that there was some other explanation for why my best friend suddenly vanished from my life, as if our 3 years of friendship had meant nothing at all. There's absolutely no excuse for what I did, Marcus continued, his voice heavy with 20 years of accumulated regret that he had never allowed himself to fully examine. I was completely consumed with building my business empire, working 18-hour days, convinced that financial success was the only measure that mattered in judging a life well lived. I told myself I didn't have time for relationships that weren't directly profitable or strategically advantageous. Isabella had been listening from behind the medical curtain, and now she stepped forward with an expression that mixed righteous anger with painful understanding, born from her own experience with difficult choices and their consequences. So, you abandoned your best friend because your pride was wounded. You let 20 years pass without a single phone call or letter because he chose public service over corporate profits. Yes, Marcus said simply, meeting her accusatory gaze without flinching or attempting to minimize his moral failure. I did exactly that. And there's no defense for such selfishness except to acknowledge that I was young and arrogant and had completely lost sight of what actually mattered in human existence. Eduardo reached out with surprising strength and grasped Marcus's hand with the warmth that had always characterized their friendship during better times. Hermano, we were both young men trying to figure out our place in the world. We both made mistakes during those years. The important thing is that we're here now, in this moment, and you're willing to help my family when they need support most desperately. But that's exactly the problem, Eddie, Marcus said with growing desperation as the full scope of his moral failure became clear. If I hadn't been such a selfish, prideful bastard, If I had maintained our friendship like a decent human being should have, I would have known about your cancer diagnosis 2 years ago when treatment options were more promising. I could have connected you with the best specialists from the very beginning, ensured you had access to experimental treatments before the disease progressed this far. The weight of missed opportunities and preventable suffering crashed down on Marcus like a physical force that made breathing difficult. Sophia could have continued her music lessons and attended the finest schools, developing her extraordinary talents in an environment of security and encouragement. Eduardo could have received cutting-edge medical care immediately, instead of watching their savings disappear while his cancer metastasized. Isabella could have maintained her nursing career instead of sacrificing everything to care for her dying husband. Marcus, Eduardo said with firm conviction despite his physical weakness, you cannot change what happened in the past. None of us can rewrite history or undo decisions that seemed right at the time, but proved to have tragic consequences. But you absolutely can change what happens next. And that's what matters now. Sophia appeared beside her father's hospital bed. Having listened to the entire adult conversation with the serious attention she brought to everything that concerned her family's well-being and future. Mr. Marcus, she said, with the careful articulation of someone who understood that words carried enormous weight in shaping reality. Papa taught me that the true measure of a person isn't the mistakes they make when they're confused or scared, but what they choose to do to fix those mistakes when they're given the chance to make things right. The profound wisdom contained in her young voice nearly shattered Marcus's carefully maintained emotional composure. This 8-year-old child, who had every justification to be bitter about the circumstances that had stolen her childhood and security, was offering him forgiveness and redemption that he wasn't entirely sure he deserved. Sophia's absolutely right, Isabella said, her initial anger softening into something more complicated and ultimately more generous. Eduardo has told me many stories about your college years, about how you helped him navigate American culture and academic expectations, how you spent your own limited money to help him buy textbooks when his student visa paperwork was delayed by bureaucratic complications. Isabella paused, studying Marcus's face with the careful attention of someone who had learned to read character through years of nursing patients in crisis. The person who performed those acts of kindness is still there somewhere underneath all the business success and accumulated wealth. Money didn't fundamentally change who you are, Marcus. It just made you temporarily forget what kind of person you wanted to be. Oh, Marcus looked around at this remarkable family. Eduardo with his quiet dignity in the face of terminal illness, Isabella with her fierce protectiveness and inner strength, Sophia with her extraordinary intelligence and mature wisdom. They represented everything he had abandoned in his relentless pursuit of financial success: genuine loyalty, unconditional love, and the irreplaceable bonds that gave human existence meaning beyond mere accumulation of resources. I want to do much more than just pay for medical treatment, Marcus said suddenly, surprising himself with the clarity and conviction in his voice. I want to be part of your lives again, truly part of them. I want Sophia to think of me as Uncle Marcus, the way I always imagined she would if circumstances had been different. I want to watch her grow up and attend university and become whatever amazing thing her talents and character will allow her to become. 6 weeks later, Marcus sat in his guesthouse kitchen, watching Sophia practice piano on the Steinway Grand he'd bought to replace her family's lost instrument. Her fingers moved with precision across Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, complexity that impressed professional musicians. The guest house had become a healing sanctuary where Eduardo received advanced medical care while surrounded by family. Isabella had initially resisted the luxury, but Marcus convinced her the arrangement served his needs too. He'd lived alone too long. Eduardo was responding better than anyone hoped. The experimental immunotherapy had shrunk his tumors by 50%, his energy returning. Most remarkably, his appetite had returned, and he was gaining back weight that months of inadequate nutrition had stripped away. "Uncle Marcus," Sophia said, looking up from piano. "Mama says you have to hire her officially if she's going to keep working as your family coordinator. She says accepting charity makes her uncomfortable, but earning salary makes her proud." Marcus smiled at Isabella's self-created title. Family coordinator encompassed everything from managing Eduardo's medical appointments to organizing Sophia's tutoring, to planning weekly dinner parties that had become cherished tradition. "Tell your mother I'll draw up a proper contract this afternoon, with benefits and salary reflecting that she's managing the most important project of my life." Sophia grinned. "She also says you need to start dating because successful men shouldn't live alone forever. But I told her that's probably none of our business." Marcus nearly choked on his coffee. Isabella's matchmaking had grown bold. She'd introduced him to nurses, teachers, even a violinist from the Chicago Symphony. "Your mother is very concerned about my social life. Mama says you work too much and don't have enough fun. She says rich people forget how to be happy because they make money instead of memories." The observation was painfully accurate. Before reuniting with Eduardo's family, Marcus measured success entirely financially. Now he left the office early for dinner with people who cared about his day rather than profit margins. Eduardo appeared, moving independently for the first time in months. His color was better. Appetite returned. Wire-rimmed glasses replaced with new ones, reflecting growing optimism. "Good morning, hermano. Isabella is on the phone with Dr. Hendricks about my test results. She sounds excited. The immunotherapy is working better than expected. Your tumor markers are dropping consistently. Metastases stopped spreading. Dr. Hendricks is starting to use words like remission instead of just treatment response." 3 months later, Marcus stood in Wellington Industries' boardroom, facing investors representing billions in potential deals. Instead of presenting earnings reports, he announced the most important business decision of his career. Effective immediately. Wellington Industries is restructuring our corporate philosophy. We're establishing the Eduardo Martinez Foundation for Medical Research, funded with $500 million from my personal assets. The boardroom erupted in shocked murmurs. $500 million represented substantial liquid assets that could have funded expansion or dividends. Furthermore, we're implementing comprehensive employee benefits, including full medical coverage for experimental treatments, emergency family support funds, and educational scholarships for employees' children showing exceptional potential. James Hartfield raised his hand with concern. "Marcus, these are admirable goals, but cost projections are enormous. Shareholders will question emotional decisions impacting profitability." Marcus looked around at faces reflecting the cold calculation he'd embodied for 20 years. These people measured success entirely financially, as he had until a homeless child reminded him what mattered. "Let me tell you about Sophia Martinez. She's 9, speaks 7 languages fluently, analyzes legal documents better than most attorneys. 6 months ago, she was homeless because her father's medical bills destroyed her family." The room grew quiet as Marcus continued. "Sophia's father has advanced degrees and diplomatic experience, but found himself dying in a homeless shelter because our healthcare system considers experimental treatments too expensive. Her mother lost her nursing job, caring for her terminally ill husband." Marcus displayed slides showing employee satisfaction, retention rates, and productivity improvements from 3 months of trial policies. These are exactly the people we want in our companies, contributing to communities, raising tomorrow's leaders, but our system throws them away during medical emergencies. Sarah Chen leaned forward with interest. What results have you seen from these policies? Isabella Martinez is my Director of Family Relations, transforming how I think about work-life balance. Eduardo consults on international expansion. His diplomatic experience is invaluable. Sophia tutors employee children, creating learning culture money can't buy. The questions were sharp, focusing on costs and competitive disadvantages. Marcus answered each with thorough preparation, but his motivation was entirely different from decades past. After the meeting, James approached privately. Marcus, this transformation is remarkable. Are you making these decisions because they're good business or because you feel guilty? Marcus considered carefully. Both. I do feel guilty about abandoning Eduardo, but I've learned that businesses built purely on financial foundations are hollow. Companies creating genuine value for employees and communities are more sustainable and fulfilling. That evening, Marcus found Sophia practicing violin while Eduardo and Isabella prepared dinner together. Eduardo's health continued improving. Dr. Hendricks now spoke cautiously about remission rather than just treatment response. "Uncle Marcus!" Sophia ran toward him excitedly. "Mama says we can plan my birthday party, a real party with friends and cake." Marcus knelt to hug his honorary niece, thinking how different this was from that rainy evening when they first met. Sophia was no longer a desperate child begging for survival. She was confident, brilliant, planning celebrations. "What kind of party would you like?" "Just a small party with you and Mama and Papa and some children from the employee families." "I don't need anything fancy. I just want everyone I love there." Marcus felt his throat tighten at her simple request. After offering this family anything money could buy, Sophia wanted most the presence of people who cared about her. "That sounds perfect." On Christmas morning, Sophia's 9th birthday, Marcus woke genuinely excited for the first time in decades. He'd spent weeks planning the perfect celebration, coordinating with Isabella for every detail reflecting Sophia's interests and their remarkable journey together. The guest house sparkled with hundreds of lights and festive decorations Sophia had helped arrange. The kitchen filled with aromas of Isabella's traditional Mexican birthday breakfast and Eduardo's famous tres leches cake, a 3-generation family recipe, but arriving with arms full of carefully chosen presents. Marcus found the Martinez family gathered around modest wrapped gifts that looked humble compared to his elaborate preparations. "Uncle Marcus," Sophia said with sparkling eyes, "we have a very special surprise for you too. Something we've been planning for weeks." She handed him a thick manila envelope. Inside, Marcus found legal documents that made his hands shake as he read the formal language that would change their relationship forever. "Adoption papers?" he whispered, looking up at Eduardo and Isabella with disbelief. "We want to make our family relationship completely official," Eduardo said through tears, but with strong conviction. "Marcus, you've been more than a friend. You've been a father figure to Sophia, a brother to me, and the support system that saved our lives." Isabella stepped forward, tears flowing but radiating joy. "Sophia suggested this first. She said Uncle Marcus shouldn't just visit family, he should actually be family, so we consulted attorneys. And if you're willing, we'd like you to be Sophia's legal guardian alongside us." Marcus stared at documents representing what he'd unknowingly wanted his entire adult life. Real family with people who loved him for who he was, rather than what he owned. "Are you sure? This is lifetime commitment. School plays, teenage drama, college decisions, wedding planning. You're stuck with me even when I'm annoying or overprotective." Sophia launched into his arms with pure 9-year-old enthusiasm. "Uncle Marcus, we want to be stuck with you forever. That's exactly the point of family." The adoption ceremony took place 3 weeks later in Judge Patricia Morrison's chambers, with Dr. Hendricks witnessing, and Isabella's sister flying from Mexico to celebrate. Marcus Wellington, billionaire CEO, swore to love and protect Sofia Martinez as completely as his biological daughter. Leaving the courthouse as a legally recognized family, Sofia slipped her hand into Marcus's and looked up seriously. "Papa Marcus," she said, "testing the new title. I need to tell you about my Christmas wish from last year when everything was scary." "What's that, Mija?" "When I was standing in that rain before you stopped, I wished someone would help my family. But I wasn't just wishing for money or a house or Papa's medicine." Sofia paused, intelligent eyes reflecting wisdom beyond her years. "What did you really wish for?" "I wished someone would genuinely love us, really love us for who we are, not just feel sorry for us. I wished for family that would never break apart." Sofia squeezed his hand tighter. "Then you appeared, and you didn't just help us survive. You became part of us permanently. You kept your promise about the house, but gave us something infinitely more valuable." Marcus knelt to Sofia's level, thinking about the man he'd been that transformative November evening when a homeless child challenged him to rediscover his humanity. That Marcus had been wealthy but empty, successful but isolated, powerful but disconnected from meaning. "Sofia, you saved my life just as much as I helped save your family. Before meeting you, I'd forgotten what really mattered. I had money and achievements, but not love or people who cared about me as a person." Eduardo and Isabella joined them on courthouse steps, and Marcus looked at three people who'd transformed his existence from mere wealth accumulation into authentic happiness and meaningful purpose. "Thank you for reminding me that the most important deals aren't negotiated in boardrooms. They happen when we choose love over fear, family over profit, and genuine connection over comfortable isolation." 6 months later, Marcus watched Sofia deliver a 7-language speech about helping others during difficult times. Eduardo sat healthy and strong, working as Wellington Industries Director of International Relations. Isabella had been promoted to Vice President of Employee Relations. As Sofia concluded to thunderous applause, Marcus realized keeping his promise to buy her a house had been the least important part of their story. The real promise was commitment to love unconditionally and remember that true wealth was measured in relationships. "Papa Marcus," Sofia whispered walking home, "do you think other people on the street need help like we did?" Marcus smiled, anticipating where this led. His compassionate daughter was proposing their next family mission. "I'm sure they do, Mija. What did you have in mind?" Sofia's eyes sparkled with the same intelligence that had first amazed him in the rain. "I think we should help other families like ours, families where someone is really smart but just needs a chance to show it." Marcus looked at his daughter, officially, legally, completely his now, and felt his heart swell with pride and purpose he'd never imagined possible. "That sounds like the perfect next chapter of our story."